Alright, so in 6.0 comes this new event that will actually last until December 1st, where with this selection of characters right here, you get to pick 4 of them and you get 1 constellation for them, which this include limited characters as you can see. You do also get these feathers and elixir, which is nice, and on top of the other free rewards that we're getting, you can pretty much get one good artifact of your choosing. But obviously the main selling point is the free constellations. So today I have all of the characters that you can pick, and I'm going to basically rank them based on their first 2 constellations. I'm just going to go off of that because a majority of players usually have C0 or C1. Not many really have higher constellations, and any of these characters at C6 can perform insanely well, obviously. So at that point, and if you're already spending that much money, I think you kind of got an idea of what you're going to expect. And yeah, just the first 2 constellations here, and let's get started. So I'm going to start off with Diluc here. His constellation 1 is useless, and his constellation 1 is okay. It's 30% attack and 15% attack speed. It does take 4.5 seconds to fully build up those stacks, but I'm not as bad as his C1. I'm going to be pretty quick with the standard characters. Mid C2, bad C1. I would not recommend going for Diluc at all. Okay, next up is Jean, and her C2 is actually decent as a support, and she's also a healer, obviously. So whenever she picks up a particle, the movement speed and attack speed is increased by 15% of all party members, which is very nice. Her C1, liking her skill damage, but that's pretty much it. Overall, I do think her C2 is actually decent. If you can get her up to C4, her C4 is actually pretty good with the 40% NMO res decrease. And with that, I'm going to want to put her here. Good C2, mid C1. Her C2 is actually but I do think your C2 is actually so if you don't have it, it is and also gets you closer to C4. I wasn't going to talk about later constellations, but her C4 is very good. And you also can get a free copy from the free standard selector. So overall, Jean is decent pick. I wouldn't recommend it just because you're going to lose your 50-50 to her eventually, but yeah, decent pick. And then on to Kaching. Her C2 is pretty much useless, a 50% chance of getting a single particle once every 5 seconds. She has a 40 energy cost burst, so this is completely useless. And then her C1 just deals a little bit of extra damage as AoE electro damage. So overall, this is a pretty easy choice for me. Bad C1, bad C2, I would not recommend. Moving on to Mona, her C2 is pretty much useless unless you're building just troll DPS build. Her C1 is okay. It's mainly meant for the vaporized damage as well. She does have the lunar charge now, it seems. This might be okay, I guess. The frozen, I'm pretty sure, doesn't even really work. Hydro swirl is useless, and electro and lunar charge is decent, but the vaporize is the main selling point. This is a pretty easy choice. I think it's a mid C1 with a bad C2. And now with Chi-Chi, her normal charge attack damage by 15%, and then her C1 just regenerates energy. I'm going to be pretty quick with this one. Pretty bad, would not recommend at all. On to Tignari. His C1, 15% extra crit rate, so you can go a little more heavy on crit damage. And then C2 gives a 20% danger damage bonus, which is actually decent. I'm pretty sure this is his biggest buff, unless his C6 or C4, I'm not sure, buffs more. But overall, C2 is a good constellation for him. It doesn't really bring him on par with modern DPSs, obviously, but overall, a decent constellation. I would probably put him in the same tier as Jean. Good C2 with a mid C1. And moving on to Dia, her C1 gives her extra HP and then extra scaling. And then her C2 increases her skill duration by 6 seconds, and which I believe is the full uptime or full uptime. And the additional parts is whenever you're attacked, her skill will do extra damage. I personally think I'm gonna go up here. I might change these later, but her C1 is like the extra scaling makes her not as bad, but just not anything crazy. Moving on to Klee, the first limited character that I'm going to be going over. Both constellations are kind of a defense decrease. Might think that it's good just because of how rare it is, but it doesn't really matter. You can definitely get other buffs from other characters that can do a lot more than a 23% decrease debuff. And even if like supportive role, which she's not meant for, obviously, this is kind of useless. And overall as a DPS, she is very weak in my opinion. So I'm going to put her in the same tier as Diluc mid C2 and bad C1. Okay, so with Child, his C1 is basically just for comfort. If you know how to play him, his cooldown just isn't an issue. And his C2 is pretty much useless for elemental energy. But when you use his burst, he already gets elemental energy anyway. And energy just is not an issue if you're fighting multiple enemies. And even single targets, energy is not an issue. So this is going to be a pretty easy decision for me. It's going to be bad C1 and bad C2, just because they're not really needed at all if you actually play him. Moving on to Hu Tao, the C1 is quite good. Her C1 is pretty good. However, if you have Shan Yun, then this is not really anything at all, because plunging actually does more damage, I'm pretty sure. So the stamina is just not an issue at all. Her C2 is kind of whatever, it's not really anything. So if you don't have Shan Yun, this is a very good constellation. And if you do have her, then it's kind of useless. I feel like she's a very niche character, so I'm gonna put her here, good C1, but like mid bad C2. But if you do have Shan Yun, it's honestly like down here. You just play her with Shan Yun and her constellations don't really matter. Moving on to Xiao, his C2 is kind of useless. If you like just build him properly and have him in the right team, energy is not an issue. And then the C1 is just an extra charge. It's kind of something nice. It's not anything crazy though. I think for Xiao it's probably mid C1 and bad C2. But yeah, I put him right here. And with Ganyu, she gets one additional charge at her C2. And her C1 decreases cryo res by 15%, which is decent. With the Scoffier, you're going to have minus 55% already, so it's not like the craziest debuff. But overall, I think it's decent. I put Ganyu at probably around here as well, mid C1 with the bad C2. Alright, so Albedo with C1 just regenerates 1.2 energy, kind of random. And is basically just a damage bonus, but Albedo's damage really isn't anything special in the teams he runs in. So I think this is a pretty easy, like, I mean, it's probably nice, but I think it's probably mid C2 and bad C1. With Eula, she gets a 30% physical damage bonus, or increase, and her C2 just decreases her hold skill. And I don't know too much about Eula. I don't think this really matters that much, but 30% physical damage is decent. So I'm gonna put her probably up here with the mid C1 and bad C2. With Ayaka, her is useless. The skilled cooldown decrease is not really anything. And then the C2, this can be good if you actually get all your hits off, but most of the time you're not going to get everything to hit. So C1 is bad, C2 is like mid, so I'm going to put her down here. Moving on to Yoimiya, her C1 is quite bad. She gets an extra 4-second duration, and she does get a 20% attack bonus, which seems nice, but you have to defeat an opponent that's been marked by her burst. So overall, like, most of the time I'm going to use her burst, and if it's like a boss, this is completely useless. And in AoE, Yoimiya isn't even really that good anyway. Her C2 gets a 25% pyro damage bonus, which is decent, but being at the second constellation with the C1 being nothing, it's kind of just mid. You'll be getting constant crits, and you can get this even if she's not the character, but it doesn't really mean anything. Overall, bad C1 with a mid C2. With Ito, I know like even less about him. I've never really seen him played that much, and I don't ever plan on getting him. Looking at his, he gains 2 extra stacks, and then with C2, skill cooldown and energy restoration, so 6, and you can get up to 18. Overall, these don't really sound like big damage increases, so I'm probably gonna put Ito here, just bad C1 and bad C2. Moving on to Ayato, he has like an execution damage thing at a C1, and his C2, if you have at least 3 stacks, he gets 50% max HP. So I think overall, there's not really that much HP buffer, so I think his C2 is probably mid, but his C1 doesn't really seem very strong at all. So with Kokomi, her C1 is basically like a main DPS, or just DPS increase, which isn't really what she's meant for, and the C2 is like an extra healing bonus. Seems decent, I guess. I think overall I'm going to put Kokomi at another mid C2 with a honestly bad C1. Moving on to Yaimiko, her burst will basically give her 24 elemental energy, which is nice because her burst cost is the highest in the game at 90, and then her C2 basically gives her a 60% range increase on her totems and increases their level by 1, so you'll be doing more damage. I think her C2 is nice, and her C1 is also nice just because it gets rid of like some energy recharge needs. I do think the C2 is better though, and you're not going to be bursting every rotation with Miko anyway, just because the cooldown is also quite long. So I'm going to put her in good C2 and mid C1. Moving on to Shenhe, her C1 allows you to use the skill an additional time, which means I believe you can get both types of stacks, which is very nice. And then her C2 gives her extra duration and an extra 15% cryo crit damage, which is a nice buff, I guess. With how her C1, I'm guessing that's actually pretty good, so I'm going to put it in good C1 with mid C2. Now on to the Sumeru limited characters. We have Nilou, which her C2 is very good in my opinion, and she's going to be definitely a better character with Llama coming out. So overall C2 is very good in my opinion, and the C1 gives her an extra second duration and a 65% damage increase. I think it's like decent, but her C2 is very good, so I'm going to put her here. Again, I'm probably going to move some stuff around. I'm going to take like closer looks into how constellations affect team and such, and yeah, I think I'm going to put here for now. Now looking at Sino, his C1 is a 20% attack speed increase, and he also gets this extra thing here. I'm not even really sure what this is. I don't really look at Sino much, so I'm pretty sure this is like the eye that gets the extra little like bit of burst damage. It's refreshed, but the 20% attack speed already is quite nice. And then the C2 is 5 stacks of 10% electro damage bonus, so 50%, and you can get it every 0.1 second, so you'll have this 50% electro damage pretty easily. Looking at these constellations, I think he definitely goes into good C1 and good C2, and yeah, I think overall this electro damage bonus seems nice. Of course, he's not going to be anything crazy. He was already kind of mid on release, and with Flynn's coming out and Vresa already been dropped, overall it's not going to meta, but it's going to make him a lot stronger. Now on to Wanderer. He gets an attack speed increase of 10%, and then his passive talent, his passive additional 25% of his attack is extra damage. So if you're running his main artifact set, this along with the extra attack speed increase is actually quite strong. And then the C2 is like up to 200% burst bonus, which is very nice. The front loaded damage is very good. because it can sometimes save you a whole extra rotation, which will end up saving you a bunch of time. I think this is a pretty easy good C1 and good C2, just because the attack speed increase and the burst damage increase are both very nice in my opinion. And finally we have Baiju. C1 is an additional skill charge, which is nice. And then C2 is a little bit of extra attack when your active character attacks, and extra healing, and it can be triggered once every 5 seconds. And with the additional skill charge, it will be overall healing and another damage increase from Baiju. So overall I think it's nice. I think it's probably good C1 with a mid C2. And now that I have all of these ranked, I'm going to like look around and like move stuff around. I only really moved a little bit, but I did move Dia down quite a bit, even though like with the additional scaling it's not very strong, and since it's a C1 you can get it for free. And I just think overall like Dia is just such a bad that not even C1 can really save her, so I decided to drop it down. It didn't really seem to make sense to be in the same tier as Hu Tao and Shenhe and then above these characters, so I dropped her all the way down to here. And then I dropped Diluc and Klee into the bottom tier, just because like re-looking at their kits, and I just don't think they're very strong. And yeah, so I'm gonna leave it this. So Sino, Wander, Hu Tao, and Shenhe are definitely the top 4 priorities I'd recommend. And yeah, that's gonna wrap it up today. Again, this is my opinion. You can look at other content creators to see what their lists look like. And overall, just if you have a character you want to get a constellation for that's even in a lower tier, it's not going to be the end of the world. We're probably going to get 4 constellations every year, and the list will probably be expanded upon next year, I'm guessing, to include like maybe even Fontaine characters. So if you did find this video helpful, I would greatly appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed, and I will see you in the next one.